What is a cult crime? 2021, archaeologists discover hundreds of graves at a former residential school for children. The unearthing highlighted a disturbing past. Over 150,000 innocent children were forcibly removed from their parents and their homes across Canada. Authorized by the government and the Canadian residential school system, the children were taught to denounce their own culture, language, and spiritual beliefs, relying only on the importance of European Canadian culture. A total of 139 known residential schools were developed across the country. This would be the church and state attempt at genocide. Introduced as boarding schools, but designed to force Christianity on indigenous children. Survivors recall stories of abuse from both priests and nuns, from physical to verbal and even. The children were ripped from their families and subjected to harsh conditions that led to disease, starvation, malnutrition, and many passed away. Most of the schools had their own cemetery, where oftentimes the children were forced to dig the graves of their fellow classmates, while others witnessed the victims of abuse turn into abusers themselves. The Carlisle Indian Industrial School. Said to be the inspiration behind the unbelievably dishonest and heartless promotion of assimilation, students had their hair shaved off upon arrival. Carlisle founder Henry Pratt established a military regiment, using corporal punishment when students engaged in their native culture. The school's goal was total immersion into the white man's world. Pratt's slogan, "To civilize the Indian, get him into civilization. To keep him civilized, let him stay." Forced interracial marriages, forced to let go of gender roles that supported their social and economic growth, forced the women to learn domestic skills and only to take on the expectations of the European American. English was the only language permitted on campus, and no two natives were permitted to room together if they were from the same tribe. Carlisle became the inspiration for several off-reservation boarding schools in the United States. Having sat on 24 acres, the former school was closed and transferred to the Department of Defense shortly after the United States entered World War I. The property is now part of the U.S. Army War College. One survivor from the school recalled that they can see their home from the school, and during an attempt to run away, they were captured and forced to kneel on a broomstick for days. This was the punishment for an attempting to escape. In 2008, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada was created to provide support for persons affected directly or indirectly by these events. The Commission set up a $1.9 billion compensation fund to help do just that. In 2015, the Commission identified more than 3,000 children as victims of cultural genocide. Close to 800 unmarked graves across the residential school in Saskatchewan, 200 unmarked graves in British Columbia, and even more unmarked graves were recently found. Demands for the Pope to apologize for the crimes against Indigenous people and their communities, along with requests, have been made to make church archives available to help identify missing and deceased children. In 1998, the last Canadian residential school for Indigenous children finally closed. Hit the like, subscribe if you want, but definitely leave a comment. I'm more interested in what you think.